Why does it seem like everywhere I go, there are multiple buildings that look mostly the same or follow really similar design layouts?
It's actually a specific practice of architecture. It's called architectural standardization.
It seems boring. Why do architects choose to do it?
That's more complicated than you might think. Come inside, I'll explain. Standardization is a practice where the build site and building is developed for previous projects or for multiple projects at the same time, using the same criteria, guidelines, or specifications. Versions of standardization have been used around the world, taking different forms.
Is that why I see so many houses that look the same?
Exactly. Specifically, the Soviet Union pre-World War II was expanded, which necessitated quick and cheap buildings. The USSR developed Privyaska, a version of standardization that allows flexibility in materials and plans.
Okay. So the Soviet Union can make a bunch of buildings, like houses, for the population increase?
Yes, but it wasn't only for houses. They implemented Privyaska along with the 5-year plan, a general economic proposition for expansion. Part of the plan was increasing farming, which required tractors, a relatively new concept to a lot of rural farmers at the time. One of my favorite books, beside Joseph Godlowski's Introduction to Architecture, is Spatial Revolution by Christina Crawford, which describes the building process of a tractor factory using Privyaska. The construction of the tractor factories efficiently met the goals of the Soviets' 5-year plan, thanks to Privyaska method of architectural standardization, which allowed for cheap design duplication adaptable to the specific available resources of each construction site. Privyaska can prove to be an ideal building practice in situations where efficiency and cost reduction is key.
That makes a lot of sense. But what did the USSR base the factory on?
The process started with the creation of a well-planned Soviet tractor factory within the city of Stalingrad, with materials imported from the United States. The USSR committed to standardization before the factory was even finalized. The USSR established grain as the primary commodity for funding their expanding industrialization, like the production of more tractor factories. This had a direct consequence on the impoverished, as grain was their primary source of food. Their retaliation, alongside other famine and economic collapses happening at the time, led to American companies no longer providing the necessary materials for the project to commence. This forced the USSR to utilize Privyaska, building up the surrounding Russian environment and developing the economy through its citizens and quick projects like factory expansion. As Crawford referenced in her book, Spatial Revolution, a farmer who learned concrete mixing at Stalingrad became a shock brigade leader at Kharkiv, and later won the Order of Lenin for his work on both tractor factory sites. These developments spread to creations of brick factories and wooden barracks with 6,763 workers on the factory site by 1929. The Soviets' concept of Privyaska not only allowed for the development of more factories, but it also allowed the USSR to solve its internal unrest created from their poor decision-making during the previous process of standardization.
So it seems the Soviets realized that you have to do it right to make it work. You said this was done all around the world, right? Did other governments or construction firms do the same thing? It seems like a great idea.
Everyone has their own version of standardization, but some can definitely look quite similar. The essay, Educational Architecture and Standardization, Pragmatism and Normalization of Rural Schools in Chile, speaks quite a lot upon the success of architectural standardization implemented to create schools across Chile, across the world from the USSR and South America. The Chilean government began to practice this process of architectural standardization in the early 20th century, citing that the typical school considered 3 aspects: the region's location in the country, like northern, central, and southern, the number of classrooms based on the number of students, around 40 or 50 students per room, complementary equipment, including at least one multi-purpose space, and the director's residence. Similar to the use of Privyaska in the construction of tractor factories in the USSR, the Chilean school system established a criterion which would inform the architectural standardization process for rural schools. That criterion, as mentioned, was the number of students, the region, and the necessity for complementary equipment, and having that basic understanding of requirements from the buildings allowed the standardized model to succeed. The essay goes on to say how the construction materials vary depending on location, stating that the construction would utilize masonry for the central north areas and wood for the central south. The Chilean school system, like the Soviet Union, prioritized pragmatism and efficiency rather than creativity and innovation. Though this approach may limit creativity in design and limit any major differentiation or distinction between these buildings, it achieved the government's goals of efficient and cost-effective construction to meet the rising levels of scholastic enrollment in rural Chile.
Great minds think alike. Wow. It seems like this could be a really good idea. But seeing the Kharkiv and Stalingrad factories, they don't even look the same. I thought standardization was supposed to make these buildings look the same.
That's a good point, and some people felt that way too. Upon the completion of the factory, initial observations saw too many differences in the factories and questioned the practice of standardization. Differences in the site and availability of resources resulted in differences in the constructions. The structural systems and material constitution of the 2 factories differed so greatly that the buildings could never be mistaken for one another. So was the Kharkiv factory actually a demonstration of architectural standardization? Upon closer inspection, the plans and massing of the 2 factories were nearly identical. They had the same relationships between buildings and created similar outputs. Crawford argues the differences were well within acceptable limits of the qualifications of standardization. From an outside observer, the factories would not be in the limits of standardization, but considering the situation, it is not relevant to the project. Unlike housing projects, the main goal of the factory development was to create the same space for mechanical construction. The flexible nature of Privyazka freed designers from limitations of the external structure, allowing for more efficiency and adaptability in the design process. Although the factories did not share visual similarities, their production was identical, making it a perfect example of the implementation of Privyazka. In the situations I mentioned, standardization proved beneficial and effective. However, we don't want to misrepresent the success rate of such processes. In many cases, standardization fails. Many of these failures aren't a fault of standardization. It is the misapplication of standardized practices that impede success. A famous example of misused standardization can be seen in the Chinese ghost cities, specifically the city of Ordos. The city had giant, identical apartment buildings which used standardized methods. Yet currently it says the city had giant, identical apartment buildings built using standardized methods. Yet currently it stays empty and barren, a symbol of over-aspiration and unrecognized local needs. The aforementioned cases in Chile and the USSR succeeded because they adapted to the local environment they were targeting, whether that be through materials or construction methods. Ordos simply did not do this. Instead, the large-scale standardized housing was constructed without adaptation or to affordability or demand. The project completely ignored local needs to prioritize investment goals and unattainable growth. Privyazka was a much more effective version of standardization that also developed the surrounding economy, allowing for the USSR to fix its internal unrest. While it may not appear standardization when looking at face value, in reality, the process prioritizes maintaining the internal spaces in use with more efficiency.
Thanks for taking the time to explain that I feel so enlightened.